Welcome back to another 181st Street Lunch and Learn, where today we're discussing whether behavioural marketing is unethical. So this is a subject that really interests me to look at how this idea has come about that behavioural marketing is somehow unethical and we shouldn't be using these techniques, because fundamentally behavioural marketing is about understanding how people behave and how we can change that behaviour. To me, the practice itself isn't ethical or unethical. It's about what outcomes and what behaviour change you're trying to create. But if you look at where this has come from, at the real kind of boom of initial consumerism after the Second World War, brands would very often hire psychologists to inform their advertising and their marketing and to really understand how their audiences were behaving and how they could sell more. And then in the late 1950s, there was a book that came out that was called The Hidden Persuaders. And in the book, and this sold millions of copies, but in the book, they claimed to have run subliminal messaging at cinemas to increase the sales of snacks and drinks. And they claimed that increased the sales by 70%. But obviously, this was kind of around the time of the Cold War, and there was a real backlash to it in the media and from the public, and this idea that subliminal messaging was being used to kind of control and influence our behaviour, and there was a real backlash against behavioural marketing. It later turned out that that study was completely made up and they hadn't done it, and those results were just completely made up. But it was kind of baby out with the bathwater, and there was this big backlash. And now in more recent years, as we've become aware of the climate and nature crises and our role within that, and the role of consumerism in particular, I know a lot of marketeers are questioning their purpose, questioning their role, and really questioning whether we should be selling more products and what techniques we should be using to do that, rather sometimes than questioning what products they should be selling and what brands they should be working for. And again, it feels like the baby's gone out with the bathwater, and there's been this rebellion against some of the core principles of marketing and communications. And we've almost forgotten that actually behaviour change can be a real force for good. And if we're in sustainability, we are trying to create behaviour change for good, and we're trying to nudge people towards more sustainable purchases, more sustainable ways of living. But there's been this real rise in sustainable marketing or sustainability marketing, almost as the anti-position to behavioural marketing. And I think that's where this idea that behavioural marketing is somehow unethical has come about.
I think you're absolutely right, Sean. What I would say there is that, first and foremost, any good marketeer is using behavioural techniques, whether they realise it or not. I am sat here on this webinar and I'm wearing a suit jacket. I look like an academic. There are books in the background. It all says the same thing, which is that I'm smart and I know what I'm talking about. No matter what you do, you are positioning these things in sight of customer, may it be using a rhetorical technique like a treble, where education, 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 may it be talking about comfort and fit, may it be taste. You are fundamentally highlighting the customer's need and want. And the moment you start doing that, you are into behavioral science. You are into behavioral communications. So the idea that it is fundamentally bad, we have to start with the principle of, can we actually stop? And the answer is no, because all communications is at some level scientific. You are targeting a want, a need, or a process to talk to the consumer. The moment you try to engage a consumer on their ground and on their wants and needs, you are effectively using behavioral communications. Now, if you're just talking about sustainability and pushing that messaging and ignoring the consumer to highlight your brand, then maybe you could be not behaviorally communicating, but I will lay good money after bad that those campaigns are not converting for you. High conversion is the name of the game. It is what communication specialists are paid to do. And if we're not doing that, then we're not communication specialists. And at the end of the day, there is nothing wrong with using the techniques that have been around for thousands of years. I mean, the basics of how we communicate, Aristotle, and fundamentally haven't changed. The education triplicate, that is an Aristotelian technique. And okay, there is a difference between using this science to manipulate and force people to buy things they don't want. But I fundamentally agree, Sean, that at its core, if as a communication specialist you have selected a company that offers a better solution, then why not encourage people to buy that better solution using your skill and capability rather than making that company effectively suffer by failing to provide the high-end, high-skill science required to say to people, this product is fundamentally better. And the moment you start saying this product is fundamentally better, may that be for the environment or because it's just actually better at the job, you are using behavioural techniques.
And we can't deny that there are so many examples where behavioural techniques and tactics have been used for not such ethical purposes. Obviously, one of the really prime examples in recent years is around data targeting and audience targeting and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And I know that we talk a lot to our clients about demographic targeting and taking some of those techniques used in the politics space where you can really hone down on very kind of small localized audiences and actually replicating that in retail to be very interest specific, to be very, very targeted with your messaging. And using that methodology to get your message and your product to the people most likely to buy. It actually makes you financially a lot leaner. It gets you a greater return on advertising spend, ROAS, and it's a very, very effective way of communicating. But it's kind of got a bad reputation because it's not been used in the right way with the right purposes in the past. And again, there's that kind of overall assumption that that is fundamentally evil or fundamentally wrong to do. And actually, in my opinion, that is harming businesses because they are shying away from really understanding what behavioral marketing is and how it works. Another example of this is things like scarcity and urgency, which are often kind of picked on as examples of really unethical marketing because they're used in a false way. You see a lot of websites and e-commerce sites creating false urgency, false scarcity, and being used to sell things that are harmful to the planet because of the scale at which they're produced or the materials that are in them. And actually, it's not necessarily about the technique, it's about where that technique is being applied. It's being applied in a way that is not ethical, there's not a genuine scarcity or genuine urgency to that, and it's being applied to a product that is bad for the planet and that the customer doesn't use. However, if you flip that on its head, when you look at sustainability focused and ethically focused challenger brands, a lot of them are bootstrapping or early stages of investment. They don't have the big marketing and advertising budgets to take on the Amazons of the world and the really established brands that are making slower sustainability progress for a variety of reasons. And they don't always have the means to get to a mass market and to break out. But if they did, and if they were selling more products, people would be making a more ethical, more sustainable purchasing choice and replacing something they were buying anyway with a better option. So we can talk about needing to consume less, but actually the first step on that journey is to buy better. And by doing that and by taking those brands to market with these techniques, it's my view actually that you become a more sustainable marketeer because what you're doing is you're saying these are the people that are most likely to buy your product, they're most likely to shift their behavior. Let's go to them first as your early adopters. And then let's talk about what messaging you need and what tactics you need to widen that out and reach a mainstream market. And fundamentally, if you're only talking to sustainability people about a sustainable product, they are buying like that anyway. So there's no behavior change there. And actually, in terms of if you translate that to impact, you're not actually having an impact. You're just selling more stuff to people in the same way that fast fashion brands are, because those people are going to buy those products anyway. And actually, the sweet spot of where behavior change can happen is in that gap in the middle of people that would be persuadable to changing their behaviour and would be open to trying a sustainable brand, but may need it to be framed in a different way. They may not be primarily driven by that eco messaging or by that urgency of the climate crisis, and you need to use those behavioural marketing techniques to make that product relevant to them and to give them a reason to buy and to take them on that persuasion journey. And if you can achieve that and you can switch their buying product from product A to product B, which is a more eco-friendly or ethical alternative, then you've created behaviour change, which means you've created impact.
I completely agree. I think one thing I'd add, and to come back to one of your earlier points, let's just talk about Cambridge Analytica for a second, because it has given all behavioural communications a bad rap. What they did was fundamentally not okay, and I have to pick my words carefully here. But governments have legislated to stop that happening again. The information you can use and is freely available via various different advertising and marketing platforms is inside the law, and it is inside new law that has been very specific about the use of data. Now, what we effectively, the first things we say to clients is, do you know the age and wealth and disposable income and of your clients? And then from there, do you know what they're interested in? If you can find those things, all you are doing is just perfecting how much you spend on advertising. You're not trying to manipulate and use so much information that you're not supposed to have to make people do something. What you are doing is saying, right, okay, where are the fewest barriers to entry? How do I talk to the people most likely to buy? You're not saying we're going to use giant, very complicated algorithms to make it difficult for people to say no. You are just looking for the people that are most likely to say yes. And there's a big difference in that, because any advertising works on the principle of find the people, advertise to the people. Now, one of the things that is such a big advantage to multinationals is their ability to have a margin on their advertising that they can afford just to waste. Sustainable businesses don't have that luxury. I mean, Nike can waste 100 million on a £2 billion advertising campaign and not really worry about it. However, a small business will be worried about £100, let alone 100 million. So by finding the people most likely to be part of your audience, you're not doing an evil Cambridge Analytica. You're just being a sensible business and talking to the people that are likely to buy. Just like if you have a shop and there are people in your shop, you are more likely to talk to the people that look like they're going to buy than the people that look like they're just browsing. And that is the same thing. The whole point of using age-based and income-based and interest-based targeting inside GDPR, which is the law that was put in place to make this all right and proper. If you're inside that, what you are doing is using that targeting data to get rid of the browsers and only target the people that are going to be interested and are going to do more than browse. And at that point, all you have done is save yourself money, not push your advert to lots of people that don't need to see it, which in itself has a carbon footprint, and also helped convert that person to a better way of shopping or a better product, as Sean said.
It really feels as if, as the kind of sustainability community and the marketing community within that have moved away from behavioural techniques and this fear that they are unethical and manipulative, that they've actually just shifted up the funnel and moved away from conversion focused marketing. And that's usually where we see, when we do a deep dive into brands that we work with, particularly challenger brands that are bootstrapping, haven't been around very long, maybe haven't had a lot of comms support, or at least a lot of specialist comms support. We see that they are doing a lot of storytelling at the top of the funnel, and a lot of the focus on them as a business and what their purpose is and what they're trying to achieve, but not a lot of talking about the product and what that does for people, and using those techniques to de-risk that purchase and make that conversion. Now, obviously, that is a very specialist area of comms, and you get into, if you're doing e-commerce, you get into UX and UI and the kind of fundamentals of how web design works and things like that. So it does become very specialist. But actually, fundamentally, the trap that many brands fall into across the scale, big and small brands, is too much focus on their purpose, their social environmental mission, their story as a business, and really trying to invite people in on that and be part of this mission, and not enough on actually be part of it by buying our product. And we talk about this a lot when we do talks and things. We did the other day around behavioural science and using it to increase your conversions. And one of the slides we put up is a Venn diagram of what you want to talk about and what your audience wants to hear, and finding that sweet spot in the middle where they overlap. And actually, the trap that brands fall into is they spend too long talking about their purpose and about their storytelling, and they attract a lot of engagement, they attract a lot of followers because people are interested in that, they want to hear about it, but then they don't see that converting to sales. And that is because they're not doing enough of the conversion focused marketing. And that's where some of this fear that that conversion focused marketing is an unethical piece falls in. And actually, we see a lot of brand owners fall into the trap of, should I even be selling products? Should I even be, contributing to this? But fundamentally, if you've set out to make a more ethical, more sustainable product, then yes, you should be selling it. You should be creating that behavior change. You should be creating that sweet spot in the middle where people can buy better, but they can do that in a convenient, risk reduced way that plays into how we buy. Human behavior is human behavior. We're not going to change the fact that people are always going to prioritize price and convenience, but we can change how we communicate, how we market, and we're not going to achieve that just by storytelling.
It's interesting you say storytelling, because storytelling is a really easy way into communications. It's a really easy way to build the first set of momentum for your business. And it relatively doesn't require an awful lot of communication skill to do. Your narrative flows very naturally. It's what you believe in as a business, and as a founder or as a founding team, you've probably got limited communication skill within your team. So it's a great way to be able to easily tell the story in the quantities required to build momentum. However, as businesses grow, it all becomes about conversion rates. If you're not converting, you're not selling. And if you're not selling, you're not making enough money to keep the business operational. It's that simple. In terms of how that progresses, storytelling requires an awful lot less skill than conversion mapping and audience targeting. And as a result, I personally feel that the shift in sustainability marketing has to some extent been around the idea that storytelling does not require an ROI, it does not require a ROAS, it does not require the measurement of success in the same way that you'd find in standard non-sustainability communications, which means that you're not necessarily tracking the success of your conversion, and you're not necessarily making sure that what you're putting out talks to those audiences that Sian mentioned, and talks to them in the way that they need to be talked to get conversion. And the more you convert and the more you sell a better product than its plastic filled or high intensity alternatives, the better we do for the planet, and the more we do for the planet.
I've been in sustainability almost as long as I've been in marketing. I was in kind of corporate marketing before I came into sustainability. But in the very early days, kind of pre-Blue Planet 2, pre the big awareness of plastic pollution, and really pre-climate being a mainstream media issue. You know, now it's in all of the papers all of the time, and that just wasn't the case. It was still seen as very niche, very scientific, and from a polling perspective, there was still a large amount of denial, which there isn't anymore. And really, I can understand how this conversation has evolved and why people take the position that they do, that actually the behavioural elements of marketing are unethical. There's a lot of frustration that often the responsibility for making the better choice and getting off of that consumption hamster wheel is just left to us as the consumers. And I can appreciate how disempowering that feels, because actually we can't change every single purchase that we make. We can't change every single behavior. There is wider systemic problems that need to be addressed for us to be able to do that. My frustration as somebody who fundamentally does believe in the behavioral science and applying that to the communications is that actually that's one of our most powerful tools. And the other most powerful tool is the legislation side. And we need to see the behaviour change. We need to see the general tide start to move before the legislation catches up. That's always the slowest piece of the puzzle when it comes to change. And we are starting to see that legislative tide start to turn its attention to sustainability. The EU have literally just green-lighted a ban on greenwashing and sweeping statements like sustainability. There's a little bit of irony there that actually sustainable marketing as a concept is not going to be Green Claims Code compliant, because how you would have to evidence how you're making your marketing practice sustainable. And I think we've just got confused and conflated in that there are ways to make your practice more sustainable. You know, if you're doing print, then look for the most eco-friendly print options, for example. But this wider concept of sustainability marketing and talking about the values, talking about the sustainability, focusing all on the storytelling, my frustration there is that it just creates this echo chamber and it encourages greenwashing because it's not aware a lot of the time of the real specifics of the Green Claims Code. And we see a lot of brands getting that wrong, even though they have the evidentiary basis to support their claims. They're not understanding how to communicate that because they're focusing too heavily on the storytelling side. And actually, the behavioural side of things gets us away from talking about that, makes that business as usual. That is just how we do business. Of course, we're more ethical. Of course, we're more sustainable. And these are the things we're doing. And here's the evidence for it. But actually, look at our beautiful, high quality product that is going to improve your lives in this way. And if we can focus more on that, that's how we move to a point where sustainability marketing, sustainable business is not a thing. It's just how we do business. And I've always said all the way along while I've worked in sustainability and I've helped brands communicate their purpose, their values, their sustainability, that I want to get to a point where that isn't the focus because it is just business as usual. It does feel like we're starting to get there, but it feels like at times some parts of the marketing community are the problem because they are clinging on to that and making that the USP, when actually it needs to move away from being USP into business as usual. And it feels like that's the bit that we need the legislation to change.
By focusing on the science and techniques and the behavioural elements to communication, and I don't mean leaning into pressurised marketing, but presenting in a way your client and your end purchaser understands and can associate with, leads to better sales. But not only does it lead to better sales, it leads to products being sold that are more sustainable. And the more mainstream those products go, especially in conjunction with significant amounts of regulation, the more we are actually going to affect change.
I agree, and that works the other way as well. It can make you make better, more sustainable business decisions. Really good example of that. We're working with an ethical fashion brand at the moment, and I've been digging into their data this week to understand exactly who is buying which product, what is selling for them, what isn't, which products are getting returned more than others. Just fundamentally getting a good overview of what's working for them online, who their core audiences are, which products and which messages are resonating. And actually, just from that initial top level, creating a few pie charts and saying this audience is buying this product, I can go to that founder and say, actually, this SKU is not performing for you. So we can put some ad budget behind it and it will perform for these types of audiences and actually, this age and income and these interests, and they're not making up a significant part of your existing audience. So we can put some ad budget to that and go and target people that will buy that product. Or you could decide just not to produce that product anymore. And then all of those raw materials, all of those dyes, everything else are not getting used to create something that's then sitting in your warehouse and not getting sold. Obviously, in their case, they have a circular model and nothing goes to landfill. So in terms of creating waste and things, there are processes there, but there's still energy being consumed in that production. There's still resources being used. So it would be fundamentally more sustainable not to produce that product. And I can now give them that data for them to make that decision in a way that doesn't financially impact them or their beneficiaries and their business and the people that benefit from them having an impact. And if you take that and apply that to, say, a fast fashion or a more linear fashion brand, that dead stock is ending up in landfill. Up until recently, it was being burned. It still is in some cases. So, without that intelligence, without that data, and that data fundamentally comes from understanding the human behavior and how humans are interacting with your brand, you're not making sustainability-driven decisions in your business. And that's where I think this disconnect between data, science, and behaviorally driven marketing and business decision making and sustainability actually becomes very dangerous.
If you can concentrate on the right people in the right place at the right time, and then on top of that, manage to keep your costs as low as possible and your cost of acquiring a client as low as possible, then you will take your business mainstream. And the big thing for me at the moment is that we work with a lot of businesses that are about to make that jump into the mainstream, about to be on a supermarket shelf, about to be available nationwide or across Europe. And those businesses, many of them come to us having told the storytelling element, built their base brand. I mean, we don't work with Oatly, but Oatly is a great example of that process of using storytelling to build a business and then finding yourself massive and mainstream and part of society. And then suddenly seeing a backlash because you've had to fundamentally change what you do and how you do it. And to avoid that, you can still tell the storytelling piece, but make it about the individual's impact. And the moment you do that, that is behavioural. If you're talking about the individual's impact, you are talking about how that individual affects the world, and that becomes behavioural communications. When you then combine that with placing product prominently and placing the positives of the product to start to deal with some of the attitude behavior gap that weirdly a lot of sustainable marketing reinforces rather than tries to overcome, because it creates differential that concentrates on story rather than on product quality. We have to jump that barrier because attitude behavior gap says that the human brain thinks sustainable products are worse. So we have to look high end, we have to look like quality, we have to look good to the end consumer, and then we have to talk to the right consumer. I mean, the best example I can think of is that is visit 3 supermarkets over the next month, wherever you are, and you will find that what is stocked on the shelves changes depending on where you are, even in the same town. And that is because the consumer dictates what they want. We have to offer them a more sustainable solution and not make them make the sustainability choice, but give them the option of choosing sustainability by default. As businesses in sustainability and in ethical business, we can't rely on charity communication styles to push sales. Charity communication styles have very, very low conversions, and if you can get high conversions, you are working for one of the big charities. Those styles don't work for product and service-based businesses, and you can take some of the very successful methodologies that are used by that sector but are still behavioural in focus and repurpose them into your communications. But if you're purely leading with storytelling and you're purely leading with the planet saving or ethical elements of your business, you're not giving the end viewer or end consumer even the option of clicking to find out what your product is. Unless your product is in focus in a large proportion of your comms, they may not realize that you sell, especially given that Instagram only reaches 5% of your audience with every post, and similar numbers for Facebook. Twitter's a little bit better, but has other problems. If you are trying to change the world with a product or a service, telling people that product or service is there and is fundamentally good in terms of the product and then in terms of how it's good for the world will significantly up your conversion rates. And the moment you start moving it that way around, you are considering how the consumer shops. And the moment you consider how the consumer shops and the consumer buys, then you are into behavioral communications and behavioral marketing. And at which point your business will succeed as a result of that. But I think hopefully that proves that behavioral marketing isn't unethical. It's about giving the consumer the opportunity to purchase better. That opportunity is for the business to provide, not for the individual to find. Accessibility is the future of sustainable businesses, because the more accessible your product is, the more people buy it, and the fewer people buy the less good products.
I think you're absolutely right that we are often perpetuating that attitude behaviour gap by not focusing on the behavioural science and understanding how to close that gap, and actually just leaning into the attitude side of it of sustainability is wonderful and we all want our products to be ethical, but ignoring the fact that science shows that we subconsciously believe that eco-friendly products are less good quality, and you are only changing that perception if somebody can sample your product. And there's so much data around, if somebody touches your product, they are more likely to buy it because they feel that sense of ownership. If somebody samples your product, if it's a food and drink or a household cleaning product, for example, something in FMCG, there is something like a 90-day uptick from somebody sampling it to them going on to buy. There's so much data on all of this. And if you're ignoring that, you're making your life so much harder, but you're also not playing into the behavior piece of that attitude behavior gap, and you're not changing people's consumption habits. You're not going mainstream, and you're not taking that out there. Fundamentally, as a business founder, a business owner, somebody working in one of these businesses, if you have made that decision to start that brand, to bring that product to market, or to work for that company, you have already committed to the behavior change that you want to create. You want people to buy more eco-friendly deodorant, washing up tablets, whatever it is. And you have committed to that. And it is therefore time to use all of the tools in the toolbox to make that change happen. And I think sometimes this gap is perpetuated and this kind of internal debate goes on because of that green guilt and that sneaking feeling of, should we be selling more products? But if you have taken that role in that company, or you've brought that product to market, you've already made that decision. And likewise for marketeers, I think we get hung up on this and we get trapped in this debate because of the role that marketing and PR and advertising has played in mass consumption, but also in the greenwashing as well. And obviously we know that things like carbon footprint was a concept designed by a PR agency on behalf of the oil industry. The answer there is not to work with oil clients and not to engage in greenwashing, and to do your due diligence on the products that you are being hired to sell. Once that's done, and once you're confident that that meets the standards that you want to set for yourself as a marketeer, it's then your job and your fiduciary duty to that client to sell as many of those products as possible. and to not worry about the overconsumption of that, but to see that as part of the sustainability behavior change you want to create. And it's your job to that client, your duty to that client, and your job as a marketeer to do that in a compliant way, to evidence those green claims, and to focus your marketing on the things that are going to shift consumer behavior, which is not purely the sustainability storytelling.
There are two types of sustainability: sustainable businesses and sustainable planet. And if you're working with clients that do both, the most important thing is to help them grow, help them sell, and help them change human behavior and buying patterns. And we can do that as a sector. If we de-evil behavioral marketing, we can use these techniques to really make a difference on the ground and grow small and medium-sized businesses to a level at which they are front and center. You don't have to just target everyone and hope they already care about sustainability. You can say, we'll find these people that will like this product, and then we'll tell them the sustainability story, we'll tell them the ethical journey, and we'll put it in a way that allows them to grow with us.
It's absolutely about taking better brands, better products for the planet and for people out into that mainstream and reaching that audience segment in the middle who are persuadable to better products, who are persuadable to more sustainable behavior, but talking to them in a way that brings them in and keeps them in the fold and takes them on that journey, and doing that in a way that empowers them to go and tell your story as well and empowers them to bring other people in. That's the way that we will take sustainability mainstream, and it has to use behavioural techniques to make that happen.
Storytelling shouldn't end when you acquire the client. Actually, it should ramp up once you've acquired the client. You should be using those initial touch points to say, this is quality and it's good, come buy it. And then explaining your story over time to build loyalty, brand loyalty, product loyalty, and I hate to say it, but overall customer lifetime value. You don't want a customer to buy once. The best thing you can do as a business in comms is keep your existing customer base happy and keep them coming back by talking to them in a way they want to hear and making their impact relevant to them.
So if you are watching this and you want to learn more about behavioural techniques, make sure that you give us a follow on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter, where we send out regular behavioural insights, advertising insights, and advice for brands, FMCG challenges, and charities. And if you head to the events section of our LinkedIn page, 181st Street, you will find all the details of our next